Hello again and welcome to another video. In this one I'm going to show some only glass repairs, so replacing the glass without replacing the LCD or AMOLED panel itself. And these will be some of my first attempts at doing this kind of repair. So this video is mainly showing some mistakes and how to avoid them. So let's start with these two examples here. I will also be showing another examples in this video. But these two are Galaxy J6 2018 and A5 2017. And as you can already see, I've made some mistakes already in trying to extract these displays out of the phones. And there's quite a bit of damage on them. For example, the J6 one, I've cut the ribbon cable so the brightness doesn't work anymore, but both of these display assemblies at this point did work. So let's move to the next part, which is detaching the glass from the AMOLED screen. This machine I'm using here is a heating platform that also functions like a vacuum, so it sucks air through these holes and therefore it holds the screen in place. And this one also doubles as a UV light chamber for the curing of UV glue, which I'm gonna use later in this video. But yeah, back to my first attempts of trying to separate a glass from an AMOLED display. To do this, I am here using something called diamond wire, and with that I'm trying to slice through the LOCA layer between the display and the glass. LOCA or OCA I think just stands for optically clear adhesive. So that's just glue which is made like completely transparent, so it wouldn't leave any colored tint on the screen which you would typically get if you used a normal glue. In this stage, when you begin separating the glass from the screen, it's important to keep in mind that on the screen there's a thin film called the polarizer film, and you want this film to remain on the display and intact after you've separated the glass. So here what I'm doing with this tool is I'm trying to prepare a hole for the diamond wire to go in, and I'm trying to make sure that the diamond wire goes between the glass and the polarizer, not between the polarizer and the AMOLED panel. However, doing this with this kind of tool at least was a mistake in this case. I think I ended up breaking the panel itself, and maybe I bent it from this corner too much. So I think trying to save the polarizer film intact was a mistake, and I think the polarizer film is just a film that can be reapplied after the display is detached from the glass. Not completely sure about that yet though, as I haven't tried yet replacing a polarizer. Anyway, here I'm going to start slicing through the glue with the diamond wire, and the mistake I'm doing here is I'm inserting the wire in both the upper corners of the screen. I've learned that starting only from one corner is more safe. Starting from both corners simultaneously easily results in slicing through the polarizer film, since one corner can get between the polarizer and the AMOLED and the other between the polarizer and the glass. So here I'm beginning to work through the glue, and the key in doing this is doing this very slowly. I have this footage sped up, but yeah, being really slow and careful gives the best likelihood of not breaking the AMOLED panel during this process. It is really easy to break the wire because this wire is really thin if you do this too fast, and the tiny bits of the broken glass also really easily break the AMOLED panel itself, and that's more likely the more broken the glass is. With these first attempts I kept breaking the diamond wire. I think it's because the wire was grinding against the sharp corner of the heating platform, and while I was replacing the wire, I inserted these tools between the display and the glass, and that's also a bad idea. One reason why this was taking so long might have been that I didn't use enough heat with the heating platform. Now that I have done this successfully a couple of times, I think 80 degrees Celsius is a good setting, at least for this heating platform. Don't remember what I was using here, but it might have been 70 degrees. While you don't want to use too much heat, since that could damage the display panel, using too little heat is maybe even worse, since too little heat results in the glue not softening enough, and that results in the tiny shards of glass grazing the screen more. So when the glue isn't heated enough, it isn't softened enough, and then the tiny glass bits will poke the screen more during this process. That might be another potential reason why this repair ended up failing and the display panel ended up completely dead after this. But yeah, after a long time and replacing the wire many times, I finally ended up with a separated AMOLED panel. Next step would be to clean the glue of the AMOLED panel and then apply new glue and then apply the new glass on the AMOLED panel, but in this stage it is very recommended to actually check that the display panel still works, because it's really easy to break it at this point, and you don't want to install a new glass on a broken AMOLED panel. Testing this display was also where I noticed that this panel does not work anymore. It doesn't even display a picture, so it's completely dead. With this only glass replacement, there's so many opportunities to break the display that you should expect to break some displays. So if you want to start doing this, I would recommend starting with some older phones to practice this process. Okay, let's move to the next example. So here I have a Galaxy J6 2018, and this screen, as you can see, has suffered quite a bit when I've extracted it from the phone. Here I am also beginning the separation of the glass and display with this tool. Again, I don't recommend this. If you do this, be really careful. And also I'm beginning the process from two corners simultaneously. It's better to only begin from one corner if possible. But yeah, you can notice here that the slicing through the glue is much faster and easier than my previous attempt, and I think it's probably because I increased the temperature to 80 degrees with this one. Though it also might be different type of glue. Some types of LOCA glue are really difficult to slice through, and some are quite easy. Some might need higher temperature to slice through than others. This display ended up surviving the separation process, and one additional reason why this one survived and the other did not might be that I started this from the side of the display, which doesn't have the ribbon cables. As you can see with the display detached, the lower part of the screen in this case has the ribbon cables, and that part is really easy to damage when you slice through it with the diamond wire, so it's easier to be careful when you do that part last and start from the other edge of the screen. So as you can see here, this display did survive, and even the touch still works. In this point you might think that the most difficult part is done, but no. Next part is trying to clean what remains of the LOCA glue on the display, and that's, well, not easy at all actually. At this point I'll again say that I recommend using some kind of gloves, since you don't really know what this stuff is. Some types of LOCA glue are actually quite easy to roll with your finger like this, but with some types of LOCA glue this does not work at all. As you can see in this display from another phone, the glue is quite easy to roll with a finger, but in this case of the J6 2018, the glue just breaks into tiny little pieces. So the challenge here is mainly that this will be always quite frustrating trying to completely clean the screen of the glue, and you can't press on the screen too hard, otherwise it'll instantly break. So you're gonna need something to dissolve the glue on the screen to get it separated from the screen. So typically it would be isopropyl alcohol, and after doing this a couple of times, I'll also say that the only safe option seems to be this 99.9% isopropanol, which you need gloves and some kind of mask or respirator for. But here, since this is one of my first attempts at this, I'm still trying all the sketchier solutions I found by just googling. So here I'm just using regular hand soap, and for that reason I'm not using gloves. I still would recommend using gloves, as even if you're using soap, you're not gonna really know what type of stuff the glue itself really is. But yeah, I'm gonna list all the sketchy solutions I found by googling and tried. So in addition to hand soap, which I'm using here, I tried nail polish remover, which contains acetone, and also eucalyptus oil, which somebody said that would work in dissolving the glue. And so what I've found is that yes, sometimes these sketchy solutions actually might work better than using the proper isopropanol, but the thing is that other things than isopropanol might cause other problems, even if they're good at cleaning the glue. So here I have an Amoled screen, so it doesn't have separate backlight, but if I was replacing an LCD screen, that would contain a backlight. And so with an LCD, these sketchy solutions get between the backlight and the screen, and they will ruin that screen. So with LCD those are not gonna work. With this Amoled it might be actually fine. I'll later show an LCD only glass replacement, so I'll get back to that. For now I'll say that with LCDs definitely don't use anything other than 99% isopropanol. With AMOLED displays like this, you might get away with using, for example, hand soap like here, but actually you should still use only 99% isopropanol. I actually tried the 99% isopropanol first, even with this screen here, but I was frustrated after it didn't work the first time. After a couple only glass replacements, I've learned how to actually use the 99.9% isopropanol, so it evaporates away really quickly, so you need to be adding it all the time, and you kinda generally just need to keep working with it for some time for it to actually have an effect on the glue. But yeah, here I'm using the hand soap, and I'm using a plastic spudger tool here to scrape the glue off. And again here too, I don't really recommend using any tools like I'm using here, because it's really easy to break the screen by applying too much pressure. And this will also scratch the screen a bit if it doesn't break it. For me, tiny scratches on the display itself aren't a problem, but yeah, you can really get away without using any tools to scrape the glue, and so you should. It's all about learning to use the isopropanol properly. So here are my first attempts at cleaning the glue with 99.9% isopropanol. So I'm using a old toothbrush here that didn't work very well. I found out that a napkin or a toilet paper is way better for this, since there's much bigger contact area with the glass. So best method at cleaning old LOCA glue from screens seems to be pouring some isopropanol on a toilet paper and rubbing the screen with it repeatedly. And all of the LOCA doesn't immediately come off the screen. It'll look like there's no progress being made, but you just need to keep working at it, and you need to keep adding isopropanol as it evaporates very quickly. It kind of eats into the LOCA glue a bit by bit, and it degrades it slowly away. There's quite a thick layer of it on this screen, so it'll take some time to get all of that off. Here you can see again the J6 2018 Amoled screen, and I'm almost done cleaning it. There's some glue on the edges. Amazingly, the screen has survived to this point, although as you can see the touch doesn't work. Not sure if the glue remnants are the reason or if the touch is actually broken, but we'll continue with this repair attempt just for practice anyway. Here I'm trying to finish the cleaning of the screen with a 75% alcohol pad and applying some heat simultaneously. This didn't really work. Again, only thing that worked at cleaning the glue was the 99% isopropanol. Especially the edges of the glass are really difficult and annoying to clean, but the 99% isopropanol will do the trick eventually. Okay, so after cleaning the screen, it's time to install the new glass on the screen. So there are different kinds of adhesive you can use to glue the new glass on the screen. The glue I'm using here is LOCA glue or liquid LOCA glue, and I don't actually recommend starting with this method, so I don't recommend this liquid glue, at least for your first only glass repairs. If you start with this, chances are you aren't going to want to try a glass repair ever again. So yeah, alternative to the liquid is these LOCA sheets. I'll show how to use them later in the video. But yeah, back to the liquid LOCA glue method. So this LOCA glue will stay liquid until UV light is used to cure it. The idea here is basically to pour some LOCA glue in a steady pour and trying to avoid any air bubbles, and then you put the glass on top of the glue and then squeeze out all the extra glue. It kinda sounds quite simple and easy, but trust me, this sucks. Well, firstly, the LOCA glue is very messy and has a terrible chemical smell. I would really recommend using gloves and some kind of a respirator, and preferably doing this somewhere in separate space, for example in a balcony, as the terrible smell of the LOCA glue is gonna stay there for a couple of days. Now that the LOCA glue has been applied, we can put the new glass on top of it. So after removing the protective plastic, we can slowly and carefully drop the glass on top of the glue. It's good to let the glass just sit there without pressing it too much first. In this stage, there will almost always be air bubbles that get trapped between the glass and the glue. Those air bubbles are quite easy to guide out with some kind of tool. You don't have to keep the alignment of the screen absolutely perfect at this point. It's most important that dust or other trash doesn't get in between the screen and the glass. As you can see here, I first tried guiding the air bubbles out with my gloves. That didn't work out well, as it just moved the glass around. It was way better to use a plastic spudger tool for this, so I just kept the screen in place with other hand, and with the other I used the spudger to first spread the glue everywhere and after that push all the air bubbles out. I watched some YouTube tutorials about this before I did this, and they sure make it look easy and even very satisfying to do this, but actually it's quite difficult and even frustrating to start to learn this. When I saw no more air bubbles in the glue. The next step would be using the UV light to cure the LOCA glue. But for this we need to make sure that the screen and the glass stay in place relatively to each other, so that when the liquid glue turns solid, the screen will be correctly aligned with the glass. I use some rubber bands for this. Maybe if you have a normal UV light this would be even easier, but I have this UV chamber thing. So once I place this into the UV chamber, it'll be difficult to check if it's correctly aligned, and that's why I need to use something like the rubber band to make sure that it stays aligned. To check correct alignment, I compared it with the old glass before I had detached that one. Sometimes these replacement glasses come with the outline of the screen marked on the glass, but here I had to just eyeball it. Then I put the screen assembly into the UV chamber for just a couple of minutes for it to cure so that it wouldn't shift around anymore. But then I thought it would probably be best to add another rubber band to hold the top and the bottom part of the screen, so that there would also be something applying pressure and holding the screen down on the glass. So after half an hour in the UV light, it's time to take the rubber bands off and see if the screen is properly attached to the glass. And yeah, it looks like the glue has properly attached the glass into the screen and there's no air bubbles really. However, at this point I realized one thing I should have realized way sooner. And that is that some LOCA glue types are actually conductive. So if there's any LOCA glue left in the display connector or the other electrical parts of the display, that could cause a short, which could destroy the whole screen once it's connected into the phone. The thing is, it's really almost impossible to remove all the LOCA glue once it's gotten into the connector and other small electrical parts. I tried to clean it with isopropanol, but I don't know if this had any effect on the LOCA glue at all. Okay, this one I actually think might have been an okay idea. I left a small strip of the protective plastic on the glass in the top part of the screen where the cameras and proximity sensors are, so that LOCA glue wouldn't get there and I didn't have to therefore clean it later. Unfortunately, this screen wouldn't work when I connected it to the phone. Don't know what in the end broke it, but it sure went through a lot. My guesses would be LOCA glue causing a short or too much pressure at some point, or maybe the ribbon cables, which were already damaged when extracting the screen from the phone, finally snapped when being bent back and forth through this process. So that was my first attempt at using LOCA glue to install a new glass on an Amoled screen. I got the new glass installed with no air bubbles and good and clean alignment, but next time I'll try not breaking the screen in the process. Okay, so let's now move on to next example. So here I have an LCD screen, so this is not an OLED. At this point I had already heard that you need to be way more careful with LCD screens compared to OLED screens, because there's a separate backlight and any stuff you use on it will seep between the backlight and the screen and get stuck there permanently, causing permanent damage to the display. At this point I only had LOCA glue, and of course I had to try myself before I would believe that that doesn't work. So next I'll demonstrate why in case of LCD screens you only must use isopropanol and not anything other like nail polish remover, eucalyptus oil or hand soap to clean the glass. And also to attach the new glass onto an LCD screen you must only use an OCA sheet and not liquid LOCA glue. So with this Honor 20 I've used eucalyptus oil to clean the LCD screen and it's left some permanent marks. There's some eucalyptus oil that has gotten between the glass and the backlight. With this Honor 8 light you can also see some liquid there between the screen and the backlight. In the case of this Honor 8 Lite, this is actually just isopropanol which means it will disappear as the isopropanol will evaporate and the screen will be left intact. However, when using something else that doesn't evaporate, like nail polish remover or eucalyptus oil in order to clean the screen, or LOCA glue in order to adhere the new glass on the screen, you will get similar marks on the screen, except then they will be permanent. Especially LOCA glue on LCD screens tends to have this effect, so if you were to use LOCA glue, the whole screen would look like the one corner looks now. I swear I took footage of a LOCA damaged LCD display, but I also swear I can't find it now. Well, anyway, boils down to only use isopropanol to clean LCD screens and only use LOCA sheets in order to install a new glass on an LCD screen. Okay, so let's move on to the next repair. This is a Nokia 3 LCD screen and I will be replacing the glass on it and installing the new glass with an LOCA sheet. So after thoroughly cleaning off all the glue with the isopropanol, I noticed this one in the corner. It's actually a scratch on the screen itself. It's not glue residue, so it's damage that has been caused to the screen in the process of separating it from the old glass. Here in the bottom corner of the screen, in the flex cable part, there's also some damage that's been caused in the process of separating the display from the screen. This kind of damage is very easy to cause with the diamond wire, and this is why you should start from the part of the screen where there's no flex cables. And when you get to the bottom part of the screen with the diamond wire, it's important to stop before it digs into these flex cables. Luckily, despite the damage, both the screen and the touch work, so we can proceed to installing the new glass on the screen. Before applying the LOCA sheet, it's best to clean the screen with something. In this final testing phase, there's usually a couple specks of dust that get between the screen and the glass. I just used this tool with a piece of cloth that I got with a screen protector. So this is an LOCA sheet. It's a thin film of optically clear adhesive and it's sandwiched between two plastic layers. We can peel off the underside plastic protective layer first, and while peeling that layer we have to be really careful not to touch the LOCA sheet itself, as any dust that gets onto the LOCA sheet will remain there forever. Next, the edge of the LOCA sheet needs to be carefully lined up with the bottom of the screen. There are especially made LOCA rollers for pressing the LOCA layer onto the display, but I just used an old broken display assembly. The use of LOCA roller might result in less air bubbles and more even application of the LOCA. For me, I found that this old Samsung display works really well enough as a LOCA roller, as I don't need really a perfect result. I'm just practicing this process and not doing this professionally for a customer or something. So for me, if the end result would be a usable phone, that would be great. This part is also quite tricky because with the old display assembly I need to keep pressing evenly along all the width of the display. This part is especially difficult with those screens that have some components on the back side of the display, because when the display is uneven from the underside, it's really easy to apply too much pressure and break it. As you can see here, I made a mistake where I let part of the LOCA sheet to stick to the display before I had gotten to that part with my improvised LOCA roller. So I had to just kind of peel the LOCA sheet back, and I actually managed to recover from that mistake quite well, and now I could proceed to properly press the LOCA sheet on the display. To achieve a good result with as little air bubbles as possible, you need to do this with a steady speed and holding a consistent pressure all the time. The more evenly and cleanly you're able to press the LOCA sheet onto the display, the easier the next step of pressing the glass on the LOCA sheet will be. Usually in the final result, most air bubbles get into the bottom part of the display. So yeah, not sure if LOCA roller would be better in this regard. When pressing the LOCA sheet onto the display, it would be best to do this in one go without stopping. I wasn't able to do this with a one motion with my improvised LOCA roller, and as you can see, there's some air pockets left between the LOCA sheet and the display. Luckily it was quite easy to get rid of those just by pressing with a finger. When the LOCA sheet is properly adhered onto the display, we'll have to trim the edges of the LOCA sheet off, and this can be done with something like a razor blade. I used this tool in order to cut the remainder of the LOCA off. You have to be really careful at this not to damage the actual screen. With a razor blade there will be a lot of pressure applied onto a tiny area, so even tiniest slip of the razor blade can result in the screen getting damaged. So yeah, the same as with other stages of only glass repair, with this one you'll probably have to do this one wrong a couple of times to learn to do it right. Well, I mean learn to do it well enough. These are really my first attempts at doing this kind of repair, so if you know any better ways at doing this same thing, just let me know. Really interested in learning more about only glass repairs. So now we have the LOCA sheet laminated on the display and we're ready to stick the glass on top of that. Before that though, there's another mistake I made. The Nokia 3 has separate navigation keys and I thought I needed to put something between them and the glass to make them work. So I put a tiny slice of the LOCA film on top of the buttons, and I tested that the navigation keys worked through the glass, and even after this repair they continued to work as they should. The problem was when I tried to install a screen protector. The keys wouldn't work through the screen protector anymore. So with both the LOCA layer under the glass and the screen protector on top of the glass, there was too much distance between the finger and the sensor and the buttons wouldn't work anymore. So yeah, instead of the LOCA strip I should have probably put nothing there, or maybe a thin piece of double-sided tape. So yeah, the phone worked otherwise, I just couldn't use the navigation keys if I had a screen protector on top of the screen. Anyway, now we can finally move on to sticking the new glass on top of the display. So we'll need to remove the thin film which is on top of the LOCA as well as the one on the glass itself. I'm using the phone as kind of a mold in order to align the display properly with the glass. In my experience, this is the easiest way to make sure the glass and the screen are properly aligned. If you're gonna use the phone like this, you'll have to clean it properly so that any dust won't get between the screen and the glass. The idea here is just to get the glass to stick to the LOCA just enough so that it will keep the correct alignment. The idea is not to completely press the glass on the LOCA while it's in the phone. When the glass has stuck to the LOCA, preferably from the middle of the screen, you can remove the screen and glass assembly. The reason we need to remove it and do this step when it's not in the phone is that now we can apply pressure on the underside of the display, and as the display will bend a bit, we can try to drive all the air pockets left in the screen towards the edges from the middle. Again, the more patience you have at this point and the more slowly you work, the more clean the outcome will be. This footage is sped up 4 times, but yeah, it's important to work slowly not to break the screen again, and also the slower you do this, the less air will be trapped between the screen and the glass. Without a laminator machine or a vacuum chamber with a compressor, it will be really difficult to achieve a perfect result with no air bubbles at all. Perfect result without a laminator machine is still technically possible. I've now done around 10 of these only glass replacements with LCD screens and using an LOCA sheet as adhesive, and I think I've achieved a result with no air bubbles at all once. However, tiny air bubbles don't bother me at all. They're really only visible when the screen is off, and I'm not doing this professionally for any customers. Actually, the tiniest air bubbles, like most of those left visible in this Nokia 3, disappear in 1 or 2 days. However, bigger air pockets like the one along the bottom edge of the screen here doesn't disappear. So this one was a successful repair, ignoring the fact that I cannot use a screen protector with this phone anymore. But yeah, from this point you can assemble the phone like with any other screen replacement. Okay, so let's move to the third and final example in this video. So here I have two phones. I think they're Huawei Nova 3 and Honor Play. I'm not completely sure, but I think these phones might have the same display panel with the glass being different. With these phones also the process of separating the screen from the phone. So after confirming that the touch and screen both work, we know that it's worth trying to save this LCD screen by installing a new glass on top of it. We just need to get the broken display assembly out of the phone without damaging the screen or the digitizer, which is actually really difficult to do when the screen is shattered as badly as this one. When you try to pry this kind of broken screen up from the phone, all the broken edges of the glass dig into the display itself. So if you apply too much pressure when trying to pry the screen up, it's really easy to break the screen. So extracting this kind of broken screen out of the phone really requires patience more than anything. One thing that actually helps here, as this phone has really narrow bezels, is that there's only adhesive along the bezels. However, that thin strip of adhesive is really strong rubbery adhesive, so you'll still need to spend quite a bit of time carefully working at the adhesive and weakening it. Using enough heat is really essential here. I have this set at 80 degrees Celsius. Another thing that's really gonna help is using a wide prying tool, because that spreads the prying force onto a larger area. Especially the corners are quite critical. The display cracks here really easily. Using something less rigid to pry, like this plastic card, also helps. It's best to always use the plastic tool when you can, and only resort to the razor blade when you cannot get any further with the plastic tool. You'll pretty much always need to start with the razor blade, but when there's a gap wide enough to fit a plastic tool in, it's wisest to switch to that. When using the razor blade along the bezels like this, you have to keep in mind that there's only a millimeter of the bezel before the actual display starts. So if you push the razor blade even a bit too deep into the phone, you've likely damaged the display. So we want to only grab the glass with this razor blade, not the display under it. When inserting a plastic card between the phone and the display assembly, we need to make sure that it actually gets under the display, not between the glass and the screen. And once we get the display out of the phone, we'll need to prepare it for separating the glass and the display by picking off all the loose bits of glass. These tiny bits of glass are problematic because when we're working through this display assembly with the diamond wire, these small shards can get caught in the diamond wire and cause damage to the screen. We'll need to save the earpiece grill for the new glass. I'm sticking a protective film on top of the broken glass because that sometimes helps keeping the tiny shards of glass in place while we work at it with the diamond wire. I'm using a protective film from a screen protector, but you can just use tape in order to keep the tiny glass bits from getting dragged through the screen with the diamond wire. Sticking some kind of adhesive like tape onto the broken glass also helps the vacuum function of the heating platform hold it in place. The glass on this one was so shattered that there was these pieces in the bottom of the screen left that I had to carefully extract one by one. After picking by hand all the tiny bits of glass, I connected the LCD onto the phone and tested if it works. Actually, the screen and touch both worked. There's just one thing, which is this black spot on the bottom corner of the screen. I'm not sure what this is exactly caused by, but these black spots on LCD screens usually disappear over time. This one actually disappeared in 2 days. I had found a tutorial about fixing these black spots. Apparently you can just kinda message them and they go away. But yeah, when I tried to do that and powered up the phone, the black spot had actually disappeared on its own. But yeah, I used an LOCA sheet to laminate the screen like the previous Nokia 3 and it was successful repair. There actually is another imperfection. I think a glass bit scratched the polarizer film, so this small part of the screen only displays white. With the other phone, the Huawei Nova 3, I didn't have as much luck. I broke the screen almost immediately trying to pry it off the phone. So for that one I had to buy a complete new display assembly, but that one is to fix now. Oh, and just one additional free tip. Don't drop the displays.